Okay. Looks like.
Yeah. Okay. Good morning and welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. I'm one of the co-hosts, Bruce Wayner, and Rachel Marshall and her husband Lucas are on a family trip this week. So we will be entertaining you with some former podcasters that have been on the show before. Cole Pickett, who has been on assignment with other groups. He's been on the show several times, and Becca Wilhite, who works closely with me on a daily basis. And she has something exciting to share with you today. It's one of the things that I'm very interested in getting out to our community. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about why I think it's important to get it out to our community. I find it very interesting now in our world of social media that there are a variety of ways that a person can educate themselves. And that is actually both uh, a very nice thing, but it can also be a hindrance. And why can it be a hindrance? Is because a lot of times there's so much information out there that you don't really know where to start. And I like to go back to people that have more wisdom than I do, and that is to Nelson Nash himself. And he was a forester, as we talked about on the podcast several times. And he used to always say the best time to plant a tree was 70 years ago, and the second best time to plant a tree is today. And I think that is, you really need to do your research, but then you have to take action. Because if you take action, then you're actually going to have more and more of your knowledge that actually is going to then snowball. Because once you get into it, you're going to really understand that um, there's connections that you can make that you never thought you could make before. This actually happens in education. Becca and I were both former educators. And as you're teaching your subject matter, you actually get to know it more and more and better and better. You dive into a deeper understanding. And thus, you become what we call unconsciously competent. And so you can't do that by just research, research, research. You actually are benefiting from explaining it to people and living it. And so having a contract and then living the infinite banking concept is something that really you need to do. As Nelson said, it's more caught than taught. So as you're listening today, keep those things in mind. And before we get to Becca, let's just bring Cole back in. And Cole, let's talk about a little bit about your educational process along the last 3 or 4 years on this situation, and how have you seen things changed in the IBC social media world?
Yeah. No, thanks, Bruce. And it's good to be back on here. I know I'll see some of you guys in the chat this morning. And yeah, I mean, to Bruce's point, social media has changed a lot. And he's always told me, there's a lot of information out on the internet, but not a lot of wisdom. And so any point or any way that you would want to design an IBC policy, you could probably find something, some article, video of somebody backing that exact strategy. And so I think it's important to take everything with a grain of salt and really, double check yourself whenever you're learning things. And even things we say on this show, you should go and find other sources and really get a full, you know, a wide variety of opinions whenever you're learning anything, not just IBC, but really anything. And I think one of the things that Bruce has taught me has definitely been that to not just take anyone's opinion as the gospel and really more formulate your own opinions with the variety of educators on the internet.
Hey, Cole, that's really good. I heard somebody not too long ago say on social media, be careful who you listen to because you just may believe them. And I thought, wow, that's some great wisdom. um, because you never know from what perspective they're coming from. So our main guest today, Becca Wilhite, and I actually first met a couple of years ago, and Becca reached out as a listener to the podcast. And what I'd like to do today is she's been on the podcast before, but I'd like for her to explain to our new listeners exactly her journey and her career. Becky, you don't have to go back to, when you were born, but it might be nice to go back to maybe your college years and how you then progressed from your career from college and then from where, how we met and then how we've progressed along the way. And then we're going to talk about Becca's book that actually is an educational book for children, but I think a lot of adults could actually benefit from reading it also. So, Becca, thanks for being on the show today.
You bet. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So, starting back at college, I went to a little Southern Baptist school out here in Plainview where I live still, called Wayland Baptist University. I came on a basketball scholarship, and really my only goal when I got there was to play basketball. I had no idea career path, what I wanted to do, that it would just, I just ate, slept, and breathed basketball. So, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, but a lot of people will say, well, you can always fall back on education, at least get that. So I thought, well, I'll go that route. I know I can teach, I know I can coach. I really want to travel the world and do something really fun and exotic. But at least I could fall back on that. So I did actually spend about 9 months in South Africa after I graduated, doing some missionary work, working with some basketball programs over there. And really still didn't know what I was going to do when I got back, but it just so happened that there was an opening at here in Plainview at one of the junior highs. Middle of the year, they'd fired somebody, needed somebody right away. And before I really had time to really think about it and process it, I had a job and I'm moving back. So I was a teacher and a coach for 8 years. I coached basketball and whatever else they needed a warm body for. And I think even at that time, I was really interested in finance and things like that. I know we would have at the beginning of the year, we'd have a big insurance meeting of here's all your options, health insurance, life insurance, all these things. And everybody's eyes just glaze over after about 5 minutes. And so I started having kind of a little meeting after the meeting in my classroom where teachers would come and I would try to explain what they just heard in layman's terms. Like, this is what this means, and here's some things to think through. And so I think that's always been a strength of mine, to take something complicated and just boil it down to something really simple that people can relate to, that they can grab a hold of so that they can take action and make a good decision. So, did that for a while until I'd gotten married. We were going to start a family and made the decision that I was going to stay home. So I was a stay-at-home mom, and in the process of that, had some side hustles. I had an eBay store, tried to make a little money at nap time when the kids were asleep. And soon after that, came on staff. I'd been to the same church for a really long time and came on staff with them, doing some work with the worship teams and the guest services and that kind of thing. So I was on staff at a church for about 11 years and really thought I'd do that forever. But God had other plans, and really feel like my life kind of took a left turn about 2020 when a friend of mine was talking to me about this strategy to get out of debt using whole life insurance. And I was not interested at all. I mean, we weren't in debt, and I was completely a Dave Ramsey disciple at this point. And he said that whole life is a scam. So obviously he's right? I was just taking him as gospel, and ended up going to listen to this presentation just because a different friend invited me, and I didn't want her to go make a big mistake. She said, I know you know about finance and you kind of follow these things, and would you just come with me and hear so we can hear what they have to say? And so I begrudgingly agreed, and just going in completely closed-minded, thinking, I'm sure they mean well. I know that they're not bad people, but they are very misinformed on this, right? And so throughout that presentation, I just remember thinking, well, I didn't know that you could do that with life insurance. And I didn't know that worked that way. And just made me mildly curious enough to at least kind of do a little research to prove myself right. Right. And so I kind of started like you said, Cole, running the gamut on the internet, what all's out there, and realized very quickly that there's a lot of different viewpoints on all this, and eventually found the Nelson Nash Institute, and thought, well, if I'm going to learn about this, I should start here. And the more I read Becoming Your Own Banker. I read how privatized banking really works, building your warehouse of wealth. And by that point, I had kind of come full circle to say, wow, this not only is this not a scam, this is something that could really benefit people. I think it could benefit us, right? And so we took out our first policy in 2020, and it's been a great learning journey ever since. Like Bruce said, we met a couple of years ago, and it's just one of those life turns that you never expected, but it's been the best ride. And I'm super thankful, because I don't think I'm ever going to get bored doing this. There's always something else to learn. Whether that's professionally, personally, how do I teach this better to people? How do I make it simpler? So in a nutshell, that's my journey over the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah,
To catch
that, that's really good. Let's talk a little bit about the Dave Ramsey thing. Um, a lot of IBC people really, um, get upset about Dave Ramsey, and I don't really get upset about it, other than I think, he takes a stance on it that is just totally against it. He doesn't even consider another solution. But I think Dave's done a lot of good with a lot of people, and it actually it mirrors, I think, our basic philosophy is there's no way Dave could have done that much harm to people, as the IBC crowd says, and then been compensated so well for so long. He would have been exposed for being just a total scam. So he's not a total scam. The value he brings is to get people, what I would call undisciplined people, out of their way so that they at least get back to ground zero.
Mm-hmm.
And he's done a really good job of that, and he should be well compensated for that. The thing that Dave, I've always said, is he's really good at getting people out of debt. He's not really good at actually help people build wealth. And the way he says for people to build wealth, he thinks there's only one way to build wealth, and that's just simply to pump money into a mutual fund over and over and over again. He doesn't even talk about the alternative investments or real estate or hedges against the stock market, which we never consider whole life insurance to be an investment, and yet he says it's a terrible investment, and we're like, we agree with you, but he doesn't even acknowledge that. So it's interesting. A lot of people in the IBC community just really, really take a hard stance against Dave, the same way that they get upset that Dave takes a hard stance against whole life insurance. So I thought I'd bring that in. So talk a little bit about how then, Becca, you came to find us, and then your journey then to the Nelson Nash Institute, and then eventually becoming a practitioner, which you're an authorized practitioner. We can see it over your shoulder, your certificate.
Yeah, you bet. So, once I kind of got turned on to this idea, I was all in, and I'm kind of that type of person that if, excuse me, if I find something that I'm excited about, I'm gonna tell other people, and I'm very, there's not many of those things. Like, I'm not the type of person that's jumping from this shiny object to this side. I'm gonna do my research. I'm gonna do my due diligence. So I feel like, coming from a place of a skeptic, I almost have an advantage, because that doesn't intimidate me. If somebody says, "Oh no, that's a scam," well, yeah, that's what I thought too. But if you would be curious enough to maybe spend a few hours reading a book, I think you might discover, if we could all have a little bit of humility, right? That goes a long way, to say, "Hey, I might not be right." And these things that I've thought and been taught my whole life, there might be a better way for us. And like Bruce said, it doesn't mean everybody has to do this or everybody has to do this, but I think you deserve to at least know that it's an option, right? And take a critical and honest view of a new idea. So in my journey, I did get my insurance license, because I was so fired up about sharing this with anybody that would listen. And in that, I was a part of an insurance agency where I got a lot of great kind of foundational training. But IBC wasn't really a focus, right? So I kind of learned a little bit about that, but I still had a lot of questions. So the Money Advantage podcast was one that I found early on and really was my favorite. I learned so much from Bruce and Rachel. And I think I had gone to the website and requested a free video or something and gotten in the email campaign. And so I kept getting emails saying, hey, schedule a call. And I just wanted to be honest, say, hey, I'm an agent. I already have a policy. I'm not really looking for another one right now. But if you guys have any kind of agent training, I'd be happy to pay whatever for that, because I'm so hungry to learn the things that are past the obvious. Just there's these basic understandings of IBC, and then there's kind of the background of, well, why does that work that way? And what happens if you pull this lever? What happens to this one? And the why behind what we're teaching people. And so they were kind enough to put me on Bruce's calendar to kind of talk through that. And he agreed to mentor me in this. And that's been, I'm so grateful. I just feel like I've grown leaps and bounds past the understanding that I did have. And I don't say, hey, wow, I'm so smart. I think that's helpful to be able to explain this in a simple way, because I think, like Bruce was saying, the better you understand something, I think the simpler you can break it down. I've always thought that whatever you're teaching, you should be able to explain it to a second grader where they understand. And if you can't do that, you might not understand it well enough. And that's a challenge. Because obviously we're not going to get into the nitty gritty details of PUA riders and dividends and MECs and all this with somebody just starting. But I think you need to be able to communicate an overarching concept and an overarching vision of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish with whatever strategy you decide on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I had a really good friend when I was coaching. He was an opponent coach, and we actually enjoyed each other's competition, and then we would see each other socially. And he would always say, "Good compared to what?" And I think that we can also say, "Bad compared to what?" And then we could also say, "What is the timeline?" Because this comes into the discussion a lot of times when people say, "Well, I don't want to do an IBC contract because there's this thing out there. If it doesn't break even fast, it's bad." And we say, "Well, is that the only thing you're worried about?" So that's the timeline that you're compared to that timeline. You think it's bad, but if you actually do that timeline where you squeeze it down so you break even quicker, how's that affecting not only the rest of the contract, as far as if you're trying to get as much capital in it as possible, but also affecting the sensitivity of whether the contract can survive if life gets in the way. Mm-hmm. And this is the part that people, they always think that life is going to be perfect. Well, you've just explained how you had a pretty good life and you didn't really have any turmoil in your life, but life takes a turn all the time. It's interesting that I make this statement to a lot of clients that, I bet there's some times where you have more month than you have money. And people oftentimes laugh about that. Oh yeah, there's some months where everything goes bad. Like this past month, I've spent about $7,000 on air conditioning repairs. And luckily I have capital in my life insurance contracts that I don't have to worry about. But a lot of people are living that kind of situation where they're just one little thing like that, and they're going to be upside down. So the biggest thing about IBC contracts is that if people can understand that money has to flow and be stored somewhere, it always does. It's amazing if you look at I always tell people, go to ssa.gov and look at your history of how much money you've made, because they have a earnings history on your benefit. And all that money's flowed through your hands, and it's gone to a bank first. because nobody pays you in cash. So it goes to a bank first, and then it flows to other places. And if you can capture some of that flow so that it actually pools, this is why I'm going to introduce your book here in a second. It actually pools. That pool can get larger and larger and larger, and you have a lot of benefit from that pool that eventually can become uninterrupted. And so what I found early on from you, Becca, is your ability to communicate. And I think I'm a pretty decent communicator when I speak, but I don't think I'm a great communicator when I write. But because of your background and probably God-given talents, you're a very good communicator when you write, especially concepts. So talk about your inspiration about wanting to write the children's book and give the listeners a little bit about what's inside the children's book.
Yeah, you bet. So first of all, I never set out to write a children's book. Like that was that was another thing that wasn't on the bingo card, right? But I am very passionate about finding simple ways of explaining this concept. And so I really love analogies. I really love storytelling. I think people connect to that. And one day I was just thinking, what are some things in nature maybe that would mimic what we're trying to do in our financial environment. And I'm a person of faith, and I feel like God sometimes just drops little ideas in my spirit. I think this is one of those times of just, what about beavers? Like, maybe go learn about beavers. And I'm like, beavers, huh? Well, I know they make dams. That's about all I know. I didn't really know anything about. So I Googled, right? How does teach me about beavers? I want to learn something. And I'm reading about how they take a stream of water, that's just flowing away from them, and they use the dam to create a different environment that's more favorable to them, because they're very vulnerable on land. They're not very fast. They're very vulnerable to predators, that sort of thing. But when they build this dam and create this pond, they're giving themselves an advantage because they have everything they need right there. They have safety, they have security, they have food, they have shelter, they have supplies, everything they need right there for them. And I was like, wow, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to take money that was previously flowing away from us. Like, we have millions of dollars that flow through our hands throughout a lifetime, and the vast majority of it is flowing to other people and flowing to other entities. And so by creating kind of a financial dam, could we create this pool just like the beavers? Like, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. And so that was the inspiration for this little book. Again, I didn't intend to make it into a book. I had this idea rolling around for several months, and then one day I just decided to have some time on a Sunday afternoon. I just decided, I'm going to just make this into a little story and just top it up. And I sent it to Bruce and was like, hey, what do you think about this? It's just a little fun little thing I did, and he really encouraged me to, he was like, wow, this is really a cool concept. You should publish this. You should do something with it. And so I just kind of did the next thing and the next thing, and got on YouTube and learned how to format a children's book, and how do you publish on Amazon. And I have a good friend of mine, Jenny Ragland, who's an incredible artist. And so I was pitched that to her to see if she would be interested in illustrating it to kind of bring it to life. And so over the course of probably 4 or 6 months, this thing kind of evolved into something I never intended to do. But I really think that even with my own kids, this was kind of another piece of it. I have kids that are 9, 13, and 15, and we have policies set up for them that my parents helped with. We have basically like a 4-generation system, to where my parents have funded policies, we own them, they're on the kids, and they will eventually benefit our grandkids. So it's from my parents to my grandkids are all going to be affected and blessed by this system. But I wanted to teach them about that, and how do we get them thinking in that mindset of being good stewards. And this isn't just something that you're going to cash out when you turn 18 and go blow it on, a good time at college, right? This is something we want to keep and perpetuate and have value for and take care of. And to my knowledge, there wasn't anything out there to talk to kids I can hand maybe my oldest the Becoming Your Own Banker, and he might get that. He's pretty sharp, right? But my 9-year-old's not going to. He's not going to read that. So he was actually kind of my inspiration. If I had a young kid talking to his granddad, is kind of what the setting of the book. What kind of questions would he ask, and how would we need to communicate that with a second grader, right? So that's just kind of how that evolved, and I really hope now that this is something that people can use to talk to their families about this. But also, I think, like Bruce was saying, it's been good for spouses. Like, a lot of times one spouse or the other will get really fired up about IBC, and the other one's kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever, I don't really want to take the time to learn about all that. But I think just a conceptual, hey, here's 10 minutes, can you read this? This will kind of give you an idea of overarching what we're trying to accomplish in a way that, anybody can understand. So I hope that it's useful in that way to people, of at least maybe starting a conversation, at least creating some curiosity, so that they can have those conversations with their families and friends and whoever else wants to know.
Yeah, it's the book to me is the analogies actually help on every potential aspect of a specially designed life insurance policy that you're going to use for banking, but you're also going to use for other things, for protection, for actually leaving a legacy, because many dams that beavers build, they're there for generations. They're not just there for one, and they have to actually expand the pool. And sometimes they actually put multiple dams on streams as they go downstream, so on and so forth. And so I think it's a really good analogy. And there's a great twist at the end that we're not going to reveal, because that's what you do in marketing. You don't reveal, but there's a great twist at the end. So you're going to have to get the book to get the great twist. But I think it was also, you were talking about, how you were inspired and to do this, and the simplicity. I already said that infinite banking concept is more, Nelson said it's more caught than taught, but there's also what I find is the aha moment, is people say, oh, now I get this now. I don't know why I didn't get it before. Dr. Robert Murphy, who's one of the smartest guys I've ever known, it actually took him weeks and weeks looking at the material, and he had a fall back in his chair moment, like, I'm looking at this too complicated. It's really simple. It's just a storage place that has some other functions that you could actually control. And when he had that aha moment, then he was all in to actually teach this from an economic viewpoint. But it's not just an economic viewpoint, it's also a societal viewpoint. It's also a family viewpoint. And I did a talk at the Nelson Nash Institute, I think it was 2016. And you had talked about teaching your children that you're just not going to cash out in college. You're actually going to keep this system going. And the title of the talk was How to Make Infinite Banking Infinite. And I think that's what a lot of people miss out on. They think, well, I'm going to do this so that it benefits me now, and I'm not going to necessarily. It's not that they're trying to forget about the next generation, but they don't put it together. And I think part of the reason is they take Nelson out of context or out of content, because Nelson said your need for finance is greater than your need for death benefit in your lifetime. And I tell people, yeah, Nelson said that, but that's not exactly what you should be getting out of that statement. What he didn't say the death benefit was not important. He just was saying that the need for finance, where you're giving up 34.5% of every dollar on average to other financial institutions, why not try to capture some of that? And if you could capture some of that, your need for death benefit wouldn't be as great. But Nelson really believed in generational planning. So we have a couple of people commenting on the YouTube. So a point of clarification, when they say IBC contract or policy, they're using shorthand. It's just an easier way to say IBC contract rather than always have to say a dividend paying whole life insurance policy. That's a really good point. So in order to do this concept, it needs to be a mutual company. Why? Mutual because you're going to participate in the profits of the company. And that is a way that helps recapture some of the financing. And that company also needs to be a participating company. What that means is it's a participating in the profits so that you actually can. So not just a mutual company that's a non-participating company, but a mutual company that's a participating company. So thanks for this clarification. And used to implement there is no such thing as an IBC policy. And this is really good. And I tell people all the time, we sometimes mesh these together and we get sloppy with our words. And the insurance companies that do not accept the concept, it's one of the things that their lawyers say all the time is, hey, you got to be very clear that this is not really a bank. This is simply a concept where you're using one financial institution to mimic another financial institution. But a lot of people will say an IBC policy. And I had people that have put together this concept and contacted me, and then they reach out to home office and they talk to the service people at home office, and they talk about their IBC policy. And the home office people don't know what they're talking about because it's just a whole life insurance contract to themselves. So that's a really good point. They said people should be using the phrase IBC contract as a way to quickly describe the process of becoming your own banker. And that's the other thing I don't think people emphasize enough is that there's a difference between an illustration. So people look at illustrations as a way to justify whether they're going to do it or not. They're going to try to implement the concept, but the illustration is not the contract. It actually says that on the illustration. The illustration is a snapshot in time that is projecting not only the dividends, but the mortality expenses from that point, whether you're a 1-year-old or you're a 120-year-old, if you can get a contract at 120 years old. Most of them, you can't get it past age 80. But they're going to project that dividend and mortality expenses until age 121 in most companies today. No changes, no interruptions, nothing. Now, the contract, once you put it in place, is going to tell you that there's a possibility that mortality charges can change. And by the way, you want that to happen. It's likely it's never going to happen, but you would want that to happen. You want the insurance company to be able to charge you more if something in the future happens to mortality. Why? Because you would want your contract to survive. And the only way your contract can survive is if the insurance companies can survive as a whole. So you would want that. And then the other thing that I think people don't realize with the contract, it's going to tell you all the different things that you can do to enhance the actual utilization of the contract, whether that is to catch up on your paid up additions rider, whether it's to stop paying altogether, whether it's to change mode of premium, whether it's to convert a term into another contract. There's all kinds of things within the contract that can actually help you to actually utilize a dividend paying, participating whole life insurance contract to actually utilize it to become your own banker. And the final thing I'll say, Becca, and then we can actually tell people how to get your book, is all you're doing is becoming your own banker using a different financial institution. Let's talk about, because people don't think about this. They think of banks are the only financial institutions. Banks a financial institution. An insurance company is a financial institution. You will also have places like endowments. You will have investment banks, which is a different type of a bank. And so it's just another type of financial institution that you can mimic the same type of banking functions that you would have at a traditional commercial bank. So we actually put the link to your book in the comments. Is there any other place that you want to tell people that would be easy to get your book?
I think probably Amazon. Amazon.com is the easiest place. If you're a Prime member, it'll be on your doorstep in 2 days. So,
Eh, that would be great. And can you tell people again, let's make sure, hold the book up so people know the title of the book and then your name.
Beaver Bankers by Becca Wilhite, illustrated by Jenny Ragland. This is the one. You can find it on Amazon. Yeah. Love for you to
That's
grab
great.
it. Yeah.
Cole, I know you've been monitoring the comments today. Is there any other things, because you're really good at listening and deciphering different things that I've been saying or Becca was saying? Is there anything else at the end of the podcast today that you think would be good for our listeners to take away from today?
Well, I would say Joe just commented again, and he had a very good question that I think definitely encompasses the topic of today's conversation. He asked, "What advice would you give to parents or grandparents struggling with being stuck on the idea of buying this type of insurance policy on their children?" I think Becca could definitely give some great insight to that, especially on the generational policies that she's set up for her and her family.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Becca, why don't you start? And then I always have some ideas too, but go ahead and start.
you bet. Yeah. Yeah, it can be weird, right? Like, why would I buy life insurance on my kids? That just seems kind of morbid. I'm not one to profit off of them if something happened, right? But I kind of think of it as sometimes you go to the doctor and you have whatever that you need help with, and they give you a prescription that's off label. They say, okay, this isn't really what this was made for originally, but it works. So let's use this. And I think of this concept in the same way. Maybe life insurance wasn't originally created to be a banking system, but it works, right? And so you kind of have to shift your thinking, like Nelson was always saying, rethink your thinking we're not setting something up to profit off of our children's demise, right? We're setting something up that's going to propel them into the future, that's going to give them a leg up, that's going to help them along their path, and that's only going to get better and better and better with time. And so I think if you can think of it as a generational legacy passing down through the generations, instead of, well, this seems weird, I don't want my kid to die, right? If you can shift your thinking, I think that changes everything. And get past, I think, Nelson used to say we shouldn't even call this life insurance, because
Right.
every other type of insurance you buy is for something that might or might not happen, right? You get car insurance and you hope you never use it, right? You get homeowners insurance and you hope you never use it. But this is something that is going to happen, and we hope you're 121 when it does. But it's something that's going to happen, and so that we can plan for that, we can be proactive, and we can say, okay, how do we leverage the time that we do have, and how do we, instead of having each generation start over, how can our ceiling become their floor? And I think if you think about it in those terms, then maybe that helps in that, get past that mental hurdle of life insurance, right?
Yeah, it's once again, it's because people are focusing on the death benefit only in that situation, where they say, "Oh, that's morbid." It actually happens the other way, because I actually took life insurance out on my father strategically at age 71. I've told the story before. I'm not going to tell it today, but my father was 71, and we were helping him with an overall planning of the family. And people thought, well, that's kind of weird. Aren't you actually rooting for your father to die? And I'm like, well, first of all, no. I mean, that's kind of weird when you think about it. But secondly, I show him the illustration, which once again is not a contract, but it's going to be somewhere in the ballpark. And I say, my father dies today. He pumps $150,000 into our family legacy. If he dies at 97, he pumps $758,000 into our family legacy. So I'm actually making sure he's eating his vegetables. I mean, I'm actually rooting for him to live as long as possible. And so is he, because he wants to pump as much money into his family legacy. And then the other one that um, it was such a gift when my father took a policy out on me when I was born, because I had the cash value then to borrow against. I told Nelson this story and he just thought it was great. When my father gave it to me when I got married, and my wife and I borrowed against the cash value in 1987 to actually purchase our first house. And I told Nelson, I was doing IBC before it was cool. And Nelson always thought that was funny. and so it's about the gift of not only the death benefit, but the gift of the cash value. And then the final thing, and once again, maybe people think this is morbid, maybe not, but you don't know what life's going to throw at you health wise in the future. And so this is a way to lock in your health at a very young age, because they do not do any kind of until you're actually 18 and 18 years old, they do not do any kind of paramedical exam on you unless there's something in your health history. Well, most young children do not have anything in their health history. So, they're going to do is ask the parents, "Hey, have they ever had any health issues?" No, they're not going to send a nurse out to do any kind of a parameds where they check blood or urine. So you're going to lock in their healthiest time at a very young age. And so now later on, when they get older, if they develop diabetes or if they develop lupus or they develop something, they at least have their health history locked in. So remember that. And Becca, you spurred something when you said a off use of a drug. Well, one of the off uses of a drug right now, which is taking the United States and probably other countries by storm, is the use of Ozempic, which was used for type 1 diabetes. And what they found from type 1 diabetes is when they gave this drug to lower the A1C, it actually caused weight loss. And now that wasn't the original use, but now they're using it to help people with weight loss. And so that's an example that popped into my head. So that is, if a person can get over the fact that yes, the death benefit is very helpful, but you're also giving them the gift of time and the gift of cash value, a pool. You're building their own little beaver dam for them. Then you're giving them a great gift. All right, thanks for all the comments today on our social media platforms. We had a lot of listeners. And in closing, we just want to remind you that success leaves clues. So model the successful few, not the crowd, and live